have what we came for. Let's get back to Ord Mantell.
What is it, Hunter?
That sounds like a ship.
Well, fresh off the heels of Valentine's Day, this sure was a lovely experience. With a lot of anticipation coming out from last week's double feature, you can already hear the choir of voices chanting, "This is shit," or "This is filler." I've got to be honest though, this was exactly the type of character work I wanted to be explored before we moved on further with the rest of the season. Hell, if they can dedicate an entire episode to the Wish.com version of pod racing and a homage to Indiana Jones, they could free up some space for a little grieving time. The grieving process comes a little stronger from this one though, as it centers around Omega and her coming to terms with honestly her first personal loss. She was able to accept the destruction of Kamino because she had her brothers by her side, and had already established a new home with them on the Marauder, but this one cuts a little deeper. Before I offer up how I feel on this, let's give you a quick rundown of what occurs. We open on a desolate world that carries scorched lands, barren creeks, canyons and caverns, and unpredictable storms in the sky. Sid has sent the crew out this way to retrieve some valuable minerals from one of the mines that she recently purchased in the area. We see already how unprepared the Batchers are without Echo going forward when they don't have enough numbers to secure the ship, watch the door, and retrieve the Ipsium. Hunter and Tech venture inside the mines, while Wrecker and Omega stand guard outside of it. While this occurs, they are being monitored by a nearby poacher who has their eyes set on the Marauder. Tech locates a piece of Ipsium, however, both he and Hunter are too big to retrieve it, so they call upon Omega as she manages to collect the fragment for them. As Wrecker is left alone, the poacher makes his way to the ship as it's completely out of sight from him, and as they all quickly reunite, Hunter hears the ship beginning to take off and they quickly set off to get after it, but are soon left stranded. With growing frustrations and tension starting to drag the morale of the crew down, and Tech pointing the finger at Wrecker continually throughout this for essentially being useless, they press forward into one of the canyons. As they're running out of rations and means of hydration, they're quickly drawn into a stampede from local wildlife when they discover the deer are in fact running away from an erratic storm just behind them.
Fuck.
The crew get caught in the storm, but Tech locates a nearby entrance to another mine. The only problem, however, is that Tech took the Ipsium case off of Wrecker, who dived back into the stampede to protect it from being trampled all over and causing a likely explosion.
I don't like where this is going.
With it being too heavy for Tech to handle, Tech trips, but Wrecker goes back to retrieve him, but leaves the case behind. As the storm quickly catches up on them, this means that it now picks up the case of Ipsium and throws it, blowing the entrance to the mine itself and trapping our heroes inside.
God fucking damn it!
As they begin to argue again, Hunter instructs them to start digging, and sometime later, Omega questions why they can't get a track on the Marauder. Tech mentions the thieves likely disabled it and glares at Wrecker with a clear direction of who's to blame in his mind. Tech, being oblivious to the feelings around him, says to forget about the ship as they're unlikely to get it back, and questions why Omega just can't get past it. Omega calls out Tech, who just isn't getting it. They've already lost Echo and she's not willing to lose what they consider their home too. This pisses her off and she goes off to clear her head. As she wanders through the mine, she stumbles upon an entire cache of Ipsium and begins extracting what she can. Meanwhile, Hunter and Wrecker scold Tech for his insensitive comments and demand that he goes to make amends with her. Tech goes off and locates her, and they work together to get what they can. As Omega reaches too far over, she plummets into the abyss below. Tech quickly dives in after her, being taken away by an aqueduct just below their ground, where they have a heart-to-heart shortly after and inform the others where they've gone. Once they got out of the caves, they find a nearby outpost that has means for them to get in contact with Sid, but she dismisses their request initially, claiming to be too busy, until Tech reminds them of everything they've done for her. She agrees to send someone over or a ship to retrieve them, but says it will be a few days, so hang tight for now. So this was undoubtedly a heavy watch for people like myself that have a deep-seated love for these characters and a respectful interest for the stories we're given. This, quite frankly, was an excellent self-contained character study which brought a shift over to Omega and Tech and asked them how they were feeling. The emotional depth that we see explode on screen in this episode is the purest the show has ever been. I honestly wasn't as emotional emotional for losing Crosshair, as at the time we'd only had the Batchers for a short while, with their introduction in the Clone Wars that came out a year prior, and just the first episode alone didn't give me much investment for that loss. Echo, on the other hand, we witnessed his entire journey throughout the Clone Wars, from start to finish. From his early days as training on Kamino, to his first mission on the Rishi outpost, to being then promoted to ARC Trooper, and then his eventual death, and then his resurrection, which brought him to a new lease of life alongside the squad. His departure from the show is one I feel audiences are going to struggle adjusting to for some time, and it was particularly uncomfortable not seeing his pessimistic face around them this time. Omega is struggling to process this for two reasons. Firstly, she's an unaltered clone at her core. It was just a case of switching the chromosomes to create her, but she ages normally, and with that comes the emotional complexities that a child has to navigate and figure out. Compared to her clone brothers, who were designed to mitigate stress and not allow themselves to become entrenched in emotions that will prevent them from being rational and efficient leads on the battlefield, she has to go through this. She can't rationalize these feelings easily, as children often look to their guardians or parents to establish how to feel in moments of distress, and because none of the crew were actively displaying how they were feeling in a healthy manner, likely due to their own conditioning, she was left confused and conflicted. And the second reason is that she's always had a connection with Echo despite his dismissive attitude at times and harsh mannerisms. That has meant that he does tend to call it how he sees it, which led to her initially feeling like a disappointment in his eyes at the start of the season, until he reaffirmed his beliefs in her and how he accepts her as a sister. He was the first Batcher that she had a moment alone with throughout this entire series, and immediately connected with him over their respective fears. And it blossomed from there, with little background animations at times where he would be shown watching over her. And when I say as well that the crew weren't actively able to display how they were feeling, we look back at Season 1 for example, Hunter is known to repress his feelings, as seen regarding the situation with Crosshair. Wrecker followed suit, though you can tell by his expressions that it is affecting him, and he's presenting a more defensive attitude towards Tech than normal, and Tech's assessments of certain things throughout this were harsher and almost a case of projection. Tech does explain later to Omega that he is struggling to progress past his soldier mentality that would allow him to even process grief in a way similar to her, but he does go on to say as well that just because he chooses to rationalize events and adjust to a new atmosphere in a way like this doesn't mean he doesn't feel the effects of what happens around him. The crew were clearly trying not to address the fact that Echo is gone in this, and were animated to look visibly distressed whenever his name was mentioned, and we can see that the dynamic among them has shifted. Nothing feels natural right now. There's no synchronicity between them as there would normally be. They're quick to point fingers, make harsher assessments and judgments of each other. There's little respect being offered, and it's clear that the group needs to process this time and how they're feeling. The men respected Echo's decision, but I don't think they'll be able to accept it for some time, even if Echo does jump back in every now and then. It does leave a question in my mind, however, going forward. If the crew are able to come together and overcome this latest setback, how will it impact them should Echo return? My thoughts for now at least are that they'd easily be able to incorporate him again, but it's whether he'd find any value in rejoining them, and whether this mission with Rex will provide any fulfillment for him during this time. I said last week that I love Echo, and I'm glad that the writers understood the limitations to him, and chose to do something with him rather than having floundering and becoming dead weight to a narrative that doesn't need him currently. I'll happily take my boy back in a heartbeat, but only when it feels appropriate, and to just bring him back in, say, next week's episode, which, unless done right, which I don't see how you could achieve, could seem disrespectful to the fans and the very intention that they're trying to convey through this. And that is, they're supposed to be shaking things up for the crew and keeping things refreshed and not allowing the show to stagnate. If you think about it though, the writers had already tried to prepare us for this by having so many combinations for missions in each episode throughout the season so far, and we'd see them either paired off or split up to handle several things at once, and it might have seemed rather innocent writing choices then, but if you look at it in retrospect, it was designed to prepare us for this. The last note that I feel needs to be drawn up on is Sid. The last 30 seconds are rather telling about their relationship right now. I have a feeling that the crew are about to meet exactly what Echo was concerned over when they first interacted with her. She was an easy escape for the crew in a desperate moment, but now has become a crutch for them, and I feel that Sid will become a detriment to them if they stick around much longer. Sid is seedy and scummy in her own right, and the only difference is she's not willing to sell the gang out so long as they continue to deliver, and she's provided some moments of goodwill, but Echo was always able to cut past the bullshit and could see the ill intentions underneath, where she'd never feel remorse or concern for them after their lowest moments and greatest threats. She was extremely quick to dismiss them here and tell them to figure it out on their own. It took a level of emotional blackmail and stating the facts that the Batchers are the reason she's still alive in some cases, for her to yield and eventually back down, and even then she said it would be a bit before she could come get them. I hope that the group are able to move past this point with Sid anyway, as they need to truly establish who they are and figure out what they could actually do for the galaxy. They don't need to necessarily follow Echo's path, but anything that breaks that literal chain around them right now. Anyway, I'm gonna go dry up my tears from watching this, and ask that if you like this video, bump the thumbs up, too sweet that subscribe, and until next week everyone, take care, and may the Force be with you.